It's no secret that those we consider necessary for a high quality of life, from paramedics to teachers, either work a very short amount of time before flaming out, or they sacrifice everything else in their life so that they can keep picking up the pieces for everyone else while neglecting their own. Welcome to the Just Dumb Enough podcast, a show that acknowledges no one is always an expert by dispelling misconceptions with real experts. I'm your host as always, Colton Petrie. My guest today is Irene Cop. Dr. Cop holds dual provider degrees and has suffered firsthand when it comes to the devastation of flaming out. She's here to share her story, what the helper field is really looking like right now, and how we can potentially avoid the Titanic versus iceberg moment that is not far out. Also, this is the last week to make your voice heard when you vote for Just Dumb Enough in the People's Choice Podcast Awards. You can list me as your favorite podcast influence, choose this show for Podcast of the Year, or pick it for Best Society and Culture Podcast if you don't think we're quite the best around. It would really mean so much to me for this show to win against the huge names that it is up against. Please and thank you, link in the description. Let's help the helpers. Welcome to the show, Dr. Irene Cop.
Hey, Colton. Happy to be here.
Yeah, happy to have you. Why don't you introduce yourself a bit for the audience?
I would love to. I am the author of the upcoming book, It Doesn't Have to Be So Hard, Neuro Success Secrets to Soar. That's scheduled to be published in fall 2025. And the reason why I'm so thrilled that, as you and I were talking in the green room, that I'm finally writing this book is because I'm so passionate about the message. Almost over 22 years ago, I almost died in my quest to save the world. And it has really, truly made me, it's my big ikigai since you just came back from Japan, my raison d'etre, my big why of, what gets me up in the morning, every morning, is that I need to help as many other, I'll call them visionary change makers, those disruptors who aren't happy with the status quo, help them achieve their legacy vision, their mission, without sacrificing their health, their relationships, their personal life, because it really doesn't have to be so hard.
Well, I feel like so many people are out there trying to find some scope to narrow that purpose. They're like, I know I want to do something, but I can't find that thing. Do you have like a funnel of some way that you can help them kind of narrow down where you're like, this is the thing you actually want?
So, yeah, I call my why, my path of pain to purpose. And so often that is one of those ways. In other words, the path finds you. The path finds you. And you could talk about wounded healers, since I'm a dual doctor. Maybe it's trauma from when you were a child, or a trauma that your family went through, or maybe it's some kind of adversity. I personally have found I did an informal, very unscientific study, just a quick poll. I was in the doctor's lounge in my hospital, and as all the doctors were sitting around, and we were talking about trauma, and every single one of those doctors had some kind of childhood trauma, whether it was bullying, like not just mild, right? Or whether, like me, my father suffered PTSD from atrocities he experienced in the military, and unfortunately, in his quest to numb the pain with alcohol, took it out on his family, right? So maybe it's trauma, maybe it's an injury. I love how Dr. Jill Bolt Taylor, I believe her name is, who was a neurophysiologist who specialized in research on strokes, had a stroke herself at the age of, I think, 36. And she said it completely changed her life and her perception from just observing and it's academic to it became intensely personal and truly, truly understanding what her subjects were going through and why her work was so important, right? So there are so many different ways that it can show up. Maybe, my son had a catastrophic brain injury in that near fatal car accident where I lost consciousness due to a hidden condition, adrenal exhaustion leading to hypoglycemia. As a former EMS, you are aware of that.
Fully.
Everyone assumed that I had lost consciousness. I had just fallen asleep. Or, I was even accused of doing drugs or alcohol. None of that. However, the effects were still the same. I almost killed my young sons and myself in a car accident because of a hidden condition that I, a doctor, didn't know I had, right? So that's one reason why I'm extremely passionate about it. It's like I need to make up for my family's suffering. I also, in the course of all that, because my son is still, to this day, missing 20% of his brain abouts. I saw the SPECT scan as it was being done, and I saw the brain rotating around on the computer screen and cried. And top neurosurgeons said he'll never walk, talk, or pass high school because he's missing so much. And I used the N word. What about neuroplasticity? And the neurosurgeon yelled at me, went, no, you don't understand. It's gone. It's gone. I tell you, the tissue is gone. It's not coming back. I was like, oh, okay. I won't use that word with him again. However, I already knew something that he didn't, despite him being one of the world's top pediatric neurosurgeons, because I was reading the research. And my first doctorate degree was as a chiropractor. And I have a medical degree, and I'm still going to say the chiropractors were far more cutting edge. It's just a fact. So we were already talking about neuroplasticity. I was already reading Dr. Norman Doidge's book on how the brain changes itself. Right? In other words, there's so much that was out there that conventional medicine was just ignoring it. I could go down a rabbit hole and say that even though I'm a medical doctor as well, conventional medicine to me is like the Titanic, and the iceberg is right there. And if it doesn't do something fast to change, it's going to go down like the Titanic. However, back to what I was saying. I just knew that my son could heal. And I refused to accept that prognosis, what to me was a life sentence for my young 4-year-old son after they had decided, okay, he's going to live. I was like, no, not on my watch. My son is not going to be disabled because of me. It's not going to happen. So I did whatever it took. I specialized in traumatic brain injury. I actually went back and got my medical degree so that I could go toe to toe with all the experts, all those experts that were going, it's okay, Mom. We're the experts. We know what's best for your son. And I was like, no, I know what's best for my son. And I was accused of being delusional. I was accused of being abusive because my 4-year-old son, from the time, as soon as he was out of the hospital, got 2 hours of therapy and tutoring every single day after school, during Christmas holidays, during summer holidays, right? In other words, that kid had a part-time job right until the time he was about 18. The good news is that it paid off because he not only walks, talks past high school, he graduated as, I'll get a little verklempt here, as an engineer from one of the best universities in the world. And That is the power of belief. That is the power of choosing. Here's the answer to your question, Colton. You need to choose your purpose. You don't just wait for it to show up. You choose it. I could have said to the doctor that day, "Oh, you must be right." And I chose a different path. I had no way of knowing for sure whether it was going to work out or not. But if I didn't try, I would never know, because at the time, my son was just pointing, those picture boards that they make for kids or adults, even with pictures of like chocolate milk or a hamburger or all those things that you shouldn't eat. And all he had to do is go, and point to what he wanted for dinner. And the speech pathologist called me up and said, "Well, Mom, it looks like the neurosurgeon was right. It looks like Brendan's just going to vocalize. He's not going to speak because that's all he's doing." I'm like, "Oh, really? Well, let me tell you what he's saying to me on the phone." This was over 22 years ago on the first SARS quarantine, the C bug, the second. So I was in hospital with 10 broken bones lying flat in one hospital room, not able to have visitors see my kids, and my son was in another hospital. And so the only contact I had was once a day, where at the end of the day, I would read them a bedtime story over the phone. That was it. We didn't have Zoom back then. And so I said, "Let me tell you what my son is saying to me. I'm not saying it's perfectly clear. He's saying, 'I love you, Mommy. I miss you.'" She's like, "Oh." In other words, she just assumed, as most people would, because they're taught not to question the almighty God of doctorhood. I see you laughing. You're like, "Yeah, I know what you mean." Right? And so, if I hadn't have believed, and if I hadn't have stood up and said, "No, that's not the way this is going," it would have been a very, very different story I'd be telling right now. Very different story. My son probably would barely be walking and wouldn't have passed high school. And I'd be taking him around in like a wheelchair. As it is, he is CEO of our Shift Institute. So not only is he an engineer, he's also a certified coach himself
That's
and
very
a
awesome.
brilliant business genius. Yes.
Yeah,
Proud mama moment.
I'm sure. I'm sure that it, well, and that's a huge recovery story. And it feels like, I'm laughing as we're talking about like these, kind of overhyped doctors that are out there in various places, because the field is kind of filled with a weird spectrum of personalities,
Mhm.
right? Like anyone who wants to be the helper, that was me, that was you. Like we go into these fields to help people, and it really kind of wreaks havoc upon us to do so. And you're working alongside like people who crave power and control or are just narcissists. You're like, that's what the field is made up of. It's one of these three types of people, which it drives me nuts, because you're like, well, these aren't the people I wanted to work with while I'm doing a thing I wanted to do. And so you're like, it can feel like a real struggle, a lot of the time.
Yeah. And again, in the green room, we were talking about health professionals and how they are leaving the profession in record numbers. It has escalated since the sea bug. And at the same time, Colton, as a former EMS, I'm sure that you are aware of the stat. Even before that, I believe the stat was that the average lifespan, work lifespan, not real lifespan, work lifespan of an EMS, like a paramedic, was 5 years. So
Yep.
you go through all of this school because you really, really, really want to help, and 5 years later, you're burnt out.
Well,
How
and that's,
sad is that for everyone? The patients who need you, right? And for yourself, because you have these dreams of helping, right? This calling.
yeah.
And I know you've found a different way to answer that calling. And at the same time, it lights the fire under me. Speaking of purpose, it really lights the fire under me that one of the peeps that I love to help are helping professionals. And I say helping professionals, yes, doctors and health professionals. I also include teachers, and because there are many different groups of people who feel that special calling. And when you feel that calling, it makes you driven to give and give and give, unfortunately, likely until you're bled dry, as I was. Right? And one of a number of things, I actually call it the 10-year curse. The 10-year curse. So sure, the stat is for EMS 5 years. I have found that those heart-centered high achievers, whether they're entrepreneurs, whether they're helping professionals or other types of leaders, they graduate from school and they're gung-ho to change the world, improve the world, contribute at the highest. And they get out and they get out and they get out. And you might actually find, because I could say me too on this. I remember at one point where I realized the world doesn't want to be helped. And I know better now. That was my perception at the time. It wasn't enough for me to give up at that time. It caused me to work harder and harder and harder and struggle and struggle and struggle. And then life happens, right? This is part of that 10-year curse, that you're struggling to fulfill that calling, however that looks for you. And in the meantime, you probably get married, you probably have a couple of kids, 2.5 kids, maybe a house with a mortgage, maybe 1 or 2 cars, right? And it all starts building up and building up and building up. And then life delivers the inevitable smackdowns. We just went through a massive one, right? With the sea bug. And we really didn't heal from that. Collectively, even, I call it a massive, and I'm not the only one. I was talking with one of my colleagues who is one of the top trauma experts in the world. And we agreed that the world has not had a chance to truly heal, because after all of the hype and all of the trauma of not being able to see your friends, not being able to see your family, and God forbid somebody gets sick, or you get sick and you can't be there for them, right? Or you're homeschooling and trying to work and all of these other stressors that are going on. And in the meantime, the news is like, oh, there's another wave coming, right? And another wave, right? They kept talking about, another one, because it was selling. It was selling paper. I used to say selling paper, selling news, right? And then it slowly petered out. And then it was kind of like, oh, nothing to see here, folks. Go on, get back to work. Get back to normal life, right? It reminds me of a patient years ago who was diagnosed with breast cancer. And unfortunately, right after she was diagnosed with breast cancer, her husband left her. So she didn't even have the support of her husband. She had a young son. She was a nurse. And so she was off work as she went through, she chose the chemo and radiation and surgery, all that. And then she got the good news. You're cancer-free for now. Go on, get back to life, get back to normal. And she sat in my office crying, saying, how do I do that? They're telling me to go back to normal and just pick up my life as if nothing has ever happened. And yet I feel like a dirty, wet dish rag that's been balled up and thrown away in a corner. And that is how the world feels. We have created this new normal, and I'm using quotes, air quotes when I say normal, where we think we've gotten back to normal. We just want to forget the past. And yet, our nervous systems haven't forgotten the past, right? Our nervous systems are still scarred. Our biology is still scarred. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, because then parents get sick, kids get sick. In other words, life still happens. And we're expected to somehow juggle all these balls without dropping anything. And you thought I'd forgotten. I was talking about the 10-year curse. So right around that 10-year mark, I have found over and over and over again, that's when the wheels start falling off the bus, right? Where perhaps it's weight gain, brain fog, exhaustion from poor sleep. You're so exhausted, it's like, sex? What sex? You have no energy for sex, right? So, and you may be flying off the handle at your kids or at your partner, right? The very people that you love the most. And I can guarantee that over half of your audience are likely, when they're in that space, they're flying off the handle. Why? Because over half the population is neurologically hardwired. Their survival mode is to go into what I call Hulk mode, fight, right? So whether it looks like yelling or criticism or judgment or plates are flying, unfortunately, fists might be flying, abuse has gone up, right? So what does that do for our relationships? What does that do for our relationships with our kids? And we'll start falling off the bus at work because you're dropping balls. Your focus is out the window. You're making poor decisions, or maybe you're just zoning out at work. And if you ignore all of those signs, you might start seeing other signs, like being told by your doc, oh, blood sugar is high, blood pressure is high, you're pre-diabetic, you got high blood pressure, you need to start taking this medication and this medication and this medication. 10 years is when I lost consciousness due to hypoglycemia, low blood sugar. The opposite, low blood sugar due to adrenal exhaustion. It's what I call flame out syndrome. I have had other, if I want to talk even doctors, I had another client who was a very successful doctor with multiple practices, had a heart attack at 37, 10 years. Autoimmune disorders tend to show up around 10 years. So this is where, as I said, the wheels start falling off the bus in the 10-year curse. And it's because we're trying to be everything and do everything for everyone else. And then you add that dollop of life, and we got nothing left. Got nothing left. And what we're seeing now is literally, it's a crisis. It is a new type of healthcare crisis where divorce rates are skyrocketing in health professionals and others. Many people just aren't even bothering to get married anymore. It's like, forget that noise. And then it's the great resignation and the great retirement as applies to health professionals, where they're just like, I'm done with this. I'm becoming a teacher or a real estate agent or an Uber driver. Nothing wrong with that, as long as it fulfills you. I talked, and it's not just North America. I was talking with a Danish colleague, an anesthesiologist. We were having lunch in Europe, and just a few months ago, and she said, it's like our dirty secret. It's like the doctors are just disappearing from the wards, never to come back. Why? Because, and I'm going to pick on health professionals here, and I'm sure your audience could probably go, me too, right? Where you're programmed that you cannot ask for help. Because if you have to ask for help when you're supposed to be helping everyone else, especially, then obviously you're weak, you're a failure, and you don't have what it takes, and maybe you just shouldn't be here.
Yeah. Well, and these are all the things that added up, right? Because I think like when the pandemic hit, things just everything got worse, right? Like we had all these supply chain issues and we had all these new restrictions and part of it was like, hey, as a people, we're coming together and accepting that this is normal. And
Mm,
so we all just kind of had to swallow it as much as we're like, this is awful. Like we just had to kind of choke that back down. Like, okay, well, I guess I accept that this is the new normal. And when you look at, helping professionals, teachers that are begging to hit a $40,000 a year salary because there's no minimum for teachers. The same thing in EMS, where I know people who are saying, like, I could go work at McDonald's and make more money.
yeah.
Like I had several EMTs that worked under me that said, like, I can make more money doing literally anything else. And I'm like, yeah, you can, and you'd have benefits. Because I happen to know the company we're working for right now doesn't. We're drastically undercovered, we just don't have any support systems. And so when the world around us gets worse, like we have fewer crutches to lean on. And so you start to see that like all this money that's been invested in our education and all the time we've put to helping other people, and we have nowhere, like no outlets left. I know that was a point I got to, and I was like, I made it, when I hit my 10-year mark, I was
Mm,
so proud of myself because I'm like, I have doubled the average paramedic lifespan, right? Like, I should have only
yeah.
made it 5 years. I hit 10. I'm killing it out here. And by year 11, I thought I was dying. I was having those exact same problems. I mean, I have chronically low blood sugar, right? That same conditions where I'm like, yeah, my adrenal response. And part of that is that, we say like, oh, these people that are here to help us. And if I wasn't working 24-hour shifts, was always working night shift because it was understaffed and badly needed. And I'm like, well, I have no problem with that. I'm a young guy. I can work night shifts. But there's so many health problems linked to that as well that like by the time you hit the bottom of this barrel, like there really is no way to climb out. The walls are slick and I can't find traction anymore. And you don't see a way out anymore. That was me as I'm like, I don't see a way forward. Like I just can't see it. Like unless someone flies a helicopter over here with an escape ladder, like I'm stuck.
Yeah. And that case in point, tenure curse, right? It doesn't make me happy, to be told I'm right. It's it's sad that it really truly is. It happened to you, it happened to me. I know it's happening to so many of your listening audience right now, and it doesn't have to be that way. Really doesn't have to be so hard. That's why I am passionate about showing those heart-centered peeps how they can help at the highest level, make the greatest impact, maybe their legacy impact, while still enjoying great health, great family and relationships, great wealth, even an amazing personal life,
Yeah.
right? You can have it all. And that is what I'm on a mission to teach, is how to do that.
So, where can we start with this? Like those that need to balance, before they've hit a breaking point, like you and I, and everything's gone sideways. How do you help people find a healthy balance before we get to the breaking point?
Mm, really great question. Really great question. Because here's the thing. One of the things that I say is, and yes, I love bringing lightheartedness to deep topics because let's face it, life's hard enough,
Yeah.
right? So one of the things I talk about is that we're in the middle of a zombie apocalypse. Didn't you know that? And I could prove it. I have a functional MRI that shows that a human brain under stress in what I call neurological survival mode is just like a zombie's. Their prefrontal cortex, what I love to call their executive rock star team that sits behind your forehead bone, is knocked offline. That is what is responsible for logical thinking, creative solutions, making good decisions, being able to act on those good decisions, and inhibiting those pesky emotions. Remember I said Hulk, right? Like, so flying off the handle at your boss or crying at the drop of a hat, right? That's what all gone. You got nothing there. Instead, what lights up in the brain are areas of the brain that are responsible for your 5 alarms, right? Your 5 alarm emotion center, your amygdala, as it's called, and those areas that are responsible for cravings, right? And addictions. So you're being run by your emotions because you're not thinking, and you are driven by your cravings. And again, I'll mention my colleague, Jan Winhall is her name. She'd make a great guest for you. And she specializes in trauma and addiction. And she and I have had several conversations that are wonderful. I just re-interviewed her a couple weeks ago. And she says the reason why addiction therapy doesn't work is not because people are bad and need to be thrown in jail, and it's not because they're sick and need to be thrown in a hospital. It's because their addiction started out as a behavior that was a brilliant coping mechanism to an abnormal situation. In other words, it's simply your way, your body and brain's way of coping, of finding relief, of numbing whatever pain, physical, mental, emotional, right? And until you drill down and remove whatever is causing that pain, the addiction is going to stick around. Or if it seems to disappear, what ends up happening is that you create another addiction to make up for it. So it's time that we have a paradigm shift even around trauma and addiction. That is why I say we're in the middle of a zombie apocalypse, because I looked up the definition of a zombie, and they're not thinking, they're ruled by their emotions, they're driven by their cravings, and it seems to be transmitted by some kind of zombie virus. And I don't know about you, but it seems like we're in a pandemic of people like running around, not thinking straight, controlled by their emotions and driven by their cravings. Am I wrong?
Absolutely right.
Right? So the very first step is using what I call SOS tools to shift your neurology, because you cannot be in survival mode, in success or healing mode at the same time. It's neurologically impossible. There's very few things that I will say are impossible, and that is one of them. That is one of them. So you must flip that switch. And I always think of like those old-fashioned, I'm thinking Bugs Bunny, the cartoons where the Wile E. Coyote's coming up behind him, like trying to catch up. Then they're maybe in one of those pumpy cars, and he manages to flip one of those big railway switches. They used to have those big honking manual ones, and at the very last second, he takes off on a different track, and the Wile E. Coyote is taken on along the other track, right? In other words, there's that switch. And so SOS tools are what you can use in the moment to flip that switch neurologically over and over again. And it may feel like it doesn't work. Why? Because we have been living, remember zombie apocalypse, we have been living in our hardwired survival modes for so long, it has become like our so-called normal. And we don't even realize it. And it takes like less than a minute to flip that switch. It's just, sometimes it's so rusty and it might go, no, that's the way it's supposed to be. So then you need to like flip that switch again. And then you go, no, it's back over. Okay. Right? So the good news is that the more you use these SOS tools, it becomes easier and easier and easier. And kind of like a building that loses power, right? And then eventually the emergency generator brings it back online. So you have lights. Well, the same thing can happen in the brain, except instead of an emergency generator, it literally it just kicks you back online, and it happens faster and faster and faster to a place where even though when there's a perceived threat, your neurophysiology is going to make that switch into survival mode in milliseconds without your conscious thought, you can get to a point where it's almost imperceptible, that it doesn't need to, in other words, you don't even realize. It's like, okay, I'm back up. And the beauty of this is what's called resilience, neurological resilience, where you can use these tools that are so easy and so simple and can take less than a minute. And with practice, you can literally change your brain. There's that neuroplasticity again, the ability of the brain to change itself. And then you become more and more and more resilient. And so that is the beauty of it. And you can literally see that change on functional MRI, where the prefrontal cortex is still lit up. That is the beauty of what I love to teach first. And these SOS tools can be things like vagal nerve reset tools. That's a fancy word to say your vagus nerve is your rest and digest nerve in your body. So there's ways to stimulate that send the message to the brain that, okay, it's obviously time to heal. It's time to rest, right? So it's flipping that switch. You can do it with proper breathing, because there are ways to breathe that help you instead of hinder you. And all of these take less than a minute. And I love teaching these to my clients and to the world. Yeah. So we have them on our YouTube channel. We have them in so many places.
Well, I'll have you give me an example here in a minute, but it is, a lot of people say like, oh, well, it takes me 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour to recover from being startled and all of these things. And you're like, it's really not true. That's how long you take, but it's not the optimal time. Because there is a study that says true surprise, absolute shock, seen in the mind lasts 1/4 of 1 second. They're like, anything beyond that is technically just you being dramatic. They're like, whether it's you being dramatically angry or dramatically upset or dramatically sad, they're like, it only lasts for 1/4 of a second. They're like, yeah. So beyond that, that's a programmed response. That's something you're doing, even if you don't know you're doing it. So how do we flip that switch? What's an example of something that we can do really easily that just back online?
Okay, I would love to teach it. There's so many. I'm going to start with the foundation. You can let me know how many we have time for. So the very first one that you might say, oh, that's overdone, right? Or I already know how to do that, is breathing. And here's the thing. I've been a neurophysiological meditation instructor for longer than a doctor. I've been one for over 30 years. And this tweaked even what I knew about breathing. And that is when you breathe in, you're actually stimulating your sympathetic nervous system, right? There's that survival mode, right? Where you actually have a heartbeat that raises, in other words, even for a short time, it raises, right? Your blood pressure, all of it, that happens while you're breathing in. Why? Because your body thinks it's getting ready to run or to fight. Whereas when you pause your breath, and I'm not talking about right for 5 minutes, right? When you gently pause your breath, that flips that switch into parasympathetic, into rest, digest, healing, and success mode. And when you exhale it, as long as you can, that emphasizes the parasympathetic. So there's a couple different ways of doing this. So let's practice this. You want to be my guinea pig?
Sure.
So the first way is, and you can see what feels best for you. The first one I like to teach, especially if somebody is just starting, because when you are in that stressed out mode, and your shoulders are up around your ears and you're all closed in, right? Wanting to protect yourself, you're actually breathing with your neck muscles, right? You're not breathing with your whole lung. So you're not filling your lungs completely. So to tell that person to take a really long breath, they don't have the breath control for it. So here's one that I love to teach and that I personally use myself. And that is, and I'll just speak it out first, is that you breathe in as deeply as you can into your belly. It takes about 4 counts. And then gently pause at the top for 4 counts. And then exhale for as long as you can, maybe 6, 7, 8 counts. And then pause at the bottom before taking another breath in. So let's try that. Ready?
Ready.
Okay. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4, and pause, 2, 3, 4, and exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and hold, 2, 3, 4. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4, and hold, 2, 3, 4, and exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and hold, 2, 3, 4. How was that? Did you find that you were able to get through the 6 counts? Were you having trouble?
Well, I think this is, very different for people who haven't practiced. I think I learned it as block breathing, but I think most people call it like box or, some other variation of that in breathing. Like those pauses are deeply uncomfortable. Most people that are in the audience were probably like, I need to breathe. And there's like this
Yeah.
initial panic because that's what I felt when I first started trying those things is that
Mm-hmm.
like there's a panic in holding your breath that I think is ironic because most of the breath problems that I find in myself is I subconsciously hold my breath like
Mm-hmm.
all the time.
That is definitely a breathing pattern that is a learned behavior for sure. Yeah, the box breathing is a form of that where it's the simplest, where you count in 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4, exhale 2, 3, 4, pause 2, 3, 4, which does the trick. Because if you think about it, and math is not my strong suit, however, when you breathe into 4 and you pause for 4, that pause at the top neutralizes the counts in the breathe in, right? So everything else after that is gravy or healing, as the case may be. So the good way to start it is to, especially if you're brand new to this, and maybe it's count in 2, 3, pause 2, 3, count out 2, 3, pause 2, 3, right? And then 4, 4, 4, 4. Then you want to start extending the breathe out for as long as you can. Because again, to maximize the benefit. So you might breathe in 2, 3, 4, pause 2, 3, 4, exhale 2, 3, 4, 5, pause 2, 3, 4, right? And then exhale to 6, exhale to 7, exhale to 8. Another bonus, and because I love to have fun, and this is very powerful. I admit it, I can be very impatient. In other words, I want results yesterday. So everything I teach is how can we layer these to make it more and more and more and more powerful. So here's the thing. When you hum, it's activating your vocal cords, which are also responsible or supplied by the vagus nerve. So if instead of just breathing out your exhale, you actually hum it all out, not only will you find you can actually go longer, it's just a fun fact, right? You're actually doubling up the effects. So that is a beautiful way to do it. A more advanced way, and I interviewed a few times Dr. Nawaz Habib. He's called the vagus nerve doc. And he recommends breathing that is what he calls 4, 7, 8, where you breathe in for 4, pause for 7, exhale for 8, and then immediately breathe in for 4 again. Many of your audience may find that challenging to do. Remember, we talked about how they'll be like trying to get all that breath out. So it's good to work up to it. And those are two very similar things. And then, of course, as I say, when I layer, like when I'm teaching, especially in our courses, I will add in acupuncture points where I show powerful acupuncture points that you can press or rub to that will give you even more of that ability, right? So in other words, I love adding in other tools, layering them on top of each other so that in less than a minute, you can get like 4, 5, 6 times the power. That's where you see like real results. I will say, to me, the breath is foundational. Start with that, and then everything else you can layer on top.
Well, and it's this very fun crossover that I found between firefighters and scuba divers that
Mhm.
try to work on breath control, right, to make our air tanks last longer, is that
Mhm.
we do hum. Because like you'll find you can hum for a minute, off of one breath just because you're not thinking about it at some point. But just for the average person that can only go to those three counts, right? They're like, I'm a little anxious. I can only do in 2 3 out, hold 2 3 out 2 3 hold 2 3. That is still reducing your breathing, even if you're
Mhm.
cheating and you're breathing a little early, to about 6 a minute. Whereas before you were probably around 16 to 20,
Yeah,
like
you're
because
probably
most people,
hyperventilating.
yeah, I mean, even when we say like the average, right? An average breathing's between 12 and 16. How many times have I read that in a book?
Mhm.
It's like, okay, well, then if we do the upper end of this and we're exhaling for 8, realistically, we're only breathing about 3 times a minute.
Exactly.
And so you're like 3 versus 20 or even 16, like it's a dramatically slower rate. And you're like, you'll find you're not working so hard to breathe anymore. Because a lot of people end up they're like, I just can't slow down. And you're like, you can, I promise you. Like, take 3 deep
Mhm.
breaths and then start. If that's what you need, like psychologically trick yourself. Take 3 deep breaths, then start doing this, box breathing or extended breathing. You can trick yourself into doing this very easily.
Yeah, yeah. And as you said, humming, right? That we can naturally hum longer, especially if it's our favorite song, right? And I'm going to make a point about that though. As much as I love the Eagles songs, there's very hard to find positive, uplifting Eagles songs. Ever notice that? Am I showing my age here?
I haven't thought about
So,
it, but yeah, I'm sure it's probably accurate.
like Hotel California, like
Yeah.
rest my case right there. Here's the thing, your subconscious mind that controls survival mode cannot tell the difference between real and imagined. So every time, and I'm going to call this another SOS tool, take a total vacation from all negativity, right? That includes news, that includes gossiping with your neighbor, that includes criticizing, right? Take a negativity, retire from negativity. And if you must feel like you must like be informed and watch or read the news, then immediately do these SOS tools afterwards. It also extends to music. We know the power of music to make us feel happy or sad. Or how about a horror movie, right? Music is used all the time to play with our emotions because it goes right to our subconscious mind. So if your favorite song is that country song where I lost my truck, I lost my dog, I lost my wife, I lost my job, I lost my house all in one day, find a different favorite song to hum. Choose a happy, fun, uplifting song. And if you need to, because it's all about neurological safety, what was one song from childhood that you absolutely loved that just made you feel so safe and secure? Maybe, and there are people who have had massive traumas so that nothing is safe. However, most people feel like Silent Night is soothing if you grew up with that. Or how about Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star? Right? It doesn't have to be a fancy song. Just choose something because that has the double. You want either your favorite song or a childhood song that your subconscious mind equates as being safe. My mom used to sing, there was a French song, and it was like, Sur le pont d'Avignon, tout le monde y danse, danse, right? In other words, it was like she used to sing it all the time. And it was like one of the things that she would sing to us as she was putting us to bed, right? So that song for me is has that effect of, all right, I'm safe. And it's my neurology that feels safe, my subconscious mind. And as Jan Winhall, trauma expert, would say, it starts with that feeling of safety. Nothing else matters and will work until you have that feeling of physiological safety.
Yeah.
Addiction treatments won't work. The best success strategies won't work. You won't be able to heal. You need those SOS tools to flip that neurological switch over and over and over again until your system finally feels safe. And it can start in less than a minute.
Well, and it really goes back to what you're saying, at the start of this interview, where we're saying like you can't survive and thrive at the same time. Like they are unfortunately impossible. So if you find yourself in that headspace where you are trying to survive, I mean, really put your world into perspective. A positive song can really help. And I know lots of them that are in genres that would surprise people, but just try and get yourself like, okay, look, I'm not going to die out here right now. No one is actively hunting me. So take that moment to try and push yourself the other direction. Because like you said, the more you do that, the more natural it's going to become.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is why I'm so passionate about teaching these tools. And I'm honored to say that tools like these of mine have been used over 250,000 times, I think over 300,000 times now worldwide to
Very
help
nice.
people live and feel better. And these are completely free. Those are like just the free ones, right? That is the power that we have that we can help. When I first started putting these out, I had no idea. In fact, honestly, people are like, "How did you come up with them?" I needed them myself. Right? That, it's everything that I teach. I needed myself,
Yeah.
and you could say that I was the original guinea pig, and then my son, and then now all of my clients around the world. And it all starts with the same. In fact, I made a decision a while back that, I have a 5-step, what I call the shift formula, and I give away the first step, right? Because I can't help anyone until they flip out of survival mode so that they know that they need help. Otherwise, it's like arguing with a drunk, telling them they're not, they can't drive. Ever tried to do that?
Just try and
Right.
talk them into drinking water. It's hard enough.
Exactly, right? So that's why I made that decision a while back, is just to give away that whole first step, because I want to call it the antidote to the zombie apocalypse.
Fantastic. Well, and this is really like if you are one of those helping people or you want to be one of those helping people, I have found one of the best received ways to help others is to spread a thing that genuinely helped you because it shows a bit of vulnerability. It shows that, like, hey, I trust you and I'm going to share something vulnerable, which makes them feel like you're being extremely genuine, which I assume you are if you're doing this. So, how do people find these? Like, where can they find some of these exercises and tips and the future book? Where do we go?
So to make it really easy, you can just go to shiftinstitute.com, shiftinstitute.com. And from there, you'll be able to see all of the places that they can find me, whether it's social or YouTube or Insight Timer. I'm one of their meditation instructors on Insight Timer. Yeah, so all of those are right there. So and I agree with you that we We need to, I call blanketing the world with support. And it does start with one person. One of my favorite sayings is little hinges swing big doors, and one hinge alone can't swing a door, no matter how small. Right. So it is, I don't pretend to be some guru sitting up on top of a mountaintop, perfect, saying, thou shalt do this or that. In fact, I've been asked before, what sets you apart? Like, what makes you special? And I said, honestly, it's not my 2 doctor degrees. It's that I've been there. I truly understand. I haven't experienced everything under the face of the earth, and I don't need to, please God. And at the same time, I have experienced so much that I always say I'm in the trenches with you. I may be a few steps ahead, but I'm close enough that I can reach out my hand and grab yours and guide you. I haven't forgotten what it feels like, and I haven't forgotten the way.
Well, and that really, it reaches down to like a core memory for me, where someone once told me, we were talking about EMS and of course seeing all of these things every day. And I'm sure the same thing, for you, for everybody that works in one of these like fields, we're like, yeah, this is the 7th one today. We kind of get that jaded outlook. And they had just told me the worst thing that's ever happened to them is still the worst thing that's ever happened to them. You can't compare it to other people. If it's their worst thing, it's the worst. Like, that's all there is to it. You don't have to put another number on it. It is the worst. And so just knowing that I've had my worst, you've had your worst, everyone has had their worst until the next worst thing, right? And until then, like, we can just try and help each other. And I mean, I've loved the message the whole way through. This has been an amazing interview, and I've loved sitting here and talking with you.
Thank you so much, Colton.
Of course. Thank you again for being here. Like I said, I appreciate your time immensely.
It's been a pleasure.
So which setting is your brain in right now? Success or survival? And what does that mean for your future? In ranking news, July is basically over, and the global ranks are as follows. Number 1, the United States with Wisconsin, California, and Oregon now at the top. Number 2, England of the United Kingdom. Number 3, Australia with Victoria way out in the lead. Number 4, Canada with Ontario now just over British Columbia. And number 5, Ireland, pushing out New Zealand. That's it for this week. Have a great week, a great weekend, and I'll see you all back here next week for another new episode. Until that next episode, pretty please do all those things that help the show grow, like rating, reviewing, liking, and subscribing. Also, remember you can reach out to dumbenoughpodcast@gmail.com or on any of the social medias if you want to reach me personally. But most importantly, stay dumb.